Hey, yep, I'm live.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the Sunday Forum. We continue to kind of explore some of the ways that food intersects with how we know one another. That was kind of a little bit of a grasping for a theme for the fall. How to know each other better, how do we understand each other better. And one of those intersections, I know for me, is both who has and who doesn't have access to food. And we are really pleased and grateful to have Dr. Peter McClellan joining us today, who is the program director for ELCA World Hunger, who is celebrating 50 years of ministry this year, and he's going to say more about that. But just to note, too, that Peter and I, among other Peters, were also at seminary at the same time. And his spouse is really cool and is at a church in Bloomington. Burnsville. Yeah, in Burnsville. St. James in Burnsville. It's like the farthest eastern part of our synod, right? Or western part of our synod. Yeah, we're like the most east. That's like the farthest west. But we're really grateful, and we'll kind of walk through some of how ELCA Hunger helps to support food in our world. Okay, let's give him some love, a hand. Thanks, Peter.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. My name, like Pastor Peter said, is Peter McClellan. I am the program director for hunger education and at ELCA World Hunger. I work on you guys don't need to know the org chart, but I'm on the Building Resilient Communities team, which means I work with a whole host of folks thinking about different justice issues. So Amparo, which is our migrant ministry crew, Lutherans Restoring Creation, which is a climate justice group, and Lutheran Disaster Response, who, if you're on all the ELCA email lists, you probably get a lot of their stuff around times like these when Helene's hitting, and they're responding to a lot of work all the time. So I'm really excited to be here in this community in particular, and I'm excited to get to know how you all understand your place within your own communities. And I want to do that by talking about this thing called accompaniment theology. This is how ELCA World Hunger and all of our other partnered ministries within the ELCA around global mission and other forms of justice understand our work within the world. It's all about this thing that we call accompaniment. So we're going to talk about that alongside a little bit of Bible study. That's why you guys have those Bibles out there. And then I'm also going to talk a little bit more about a ministry within our synod that is one of our World Hunger partners called Tapestry. It's a congregation in Richfield. So Minneapolis Synod, but local to where we are, because it gives a sense for what accompaniment looks like from kind of this World Hunger lens, and also speaks pretty powerfully, I think, to the role that food plays in the sort of justice ministry of accompaniment. So, advance the slide. Let's go. Let's do it. Come on. Wait, got it.
There we go.
We're good. Okay, cool. Alrighty, so at base, what is accompaniment theology? So the ELCA itself is what we call a mission-driven church. This means that we have a sort of mission surrounded around the notion of being God's sort of reconciling presence in the world, and to do God's work in that world to show God to our neighbor. But mission, as some of you guys may know, is a complicated word. So, to some degree, it helps. We think in the Lutheran Church, we think that it helps us focus towards our sort of goal to reconcile ourselves to God's creation, to bring creation and God closer together, to show God's love in the world. But mission has also traditionally been used to hurt people. It's been used to justify colonization, the poor treatment of others, genocide, lots of very ugly things. So what accompaniment does is it moves us from treating people as the objects of mission to seeing all of our stories as part of God's larger sacred story. Okay, so there's a shift in focus there. Actually, I'm going to pop up a little image, right? So this is kind of how things have traditionally worked, right? So if you think of let's just go back to the 15th century in Europe, right? So we have our story, which is the story of the church, and the story of kind of the European colonizing experience. And there's natives in North America, in the New World. We have God's story. It's wrapped up in our story of, sort of European life and culture and society. And we're going to impose it on you, right? So there's a distance between you and me. And so we're going to pose the me onto you. That has done damage to people, not just in terms of space and time of, colonizers moving into other places. But it's also a way that people have been kind of harmed and beaten down through sort of gender and sexual identities and racial identities, things like that. It's been a way of separating people from one another and actually doing physical harm and emotional and spiritual harm to other people. So what accompaniment does is it moves to a different model. It doesn't play in the us versus them dichotomy. It doesn't even say that one way that you could understand, say, the previous slide here, one way you could understand that is like, oh, okay, this is bad, so I'm going to privilege my story or your story over my story. That doesn't operate. It still keeps that sort of division between you and me. And so instead, this brings us all together. All of this is God's story. Your story and my story are all wrapped up in this together. And your story and my story are also connected, right? So even if I'm a colonizing European in the 15th century who meets an indigenous person in, what is now, the Dominican Republic, say, just because we look and talk different doesn't mean we don't have something common with one another, right? We don't have, and then we also don't have something that we can't share with one another as well. So we have differences, we have commonalities, but all of those differences and commonalities are part of God's larger story. So that's kind of like accompaniment in pictures. We're going to come back to that. But are there any questions about what I just said? I know that's a lot of high-level sort of theology talk. Yeah.
How would you define God's story?
Oh, boy. Oh, man, we're just getting deep right away. My goodness. That's a huge question. Why don't I deflect and say, what do you think when I say that? And then let me come up with an answer. Yeah. Oh, there we go. Okay, that's one. So Genesis to Revelation, that's God's story?
Yeah, kind of.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, kind of.
But
well, that's how Luther would crudely say it. It's not biblical. You would say it's not.
uh-huh. Yeah.
That would be my answer.
Sure.
Anything that Luther would say, anything that shows forth Christ is the word of God. So anything, yeah, and that, that there are pieces like even creation is part of God's story, kind of physical, like physical representations of the masks of God's story. That'd be another addendum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, because the sort of question that comes to my mind is so Stillwater, Minnesota, Trinity Lutheran Church is not anywhere in the Bible, right? And so are we not also still sharing in God's story right now? So how do we, the question of showing forth Christ being the Word of God is something that gets at. It's true. The Pope isn't in the Bible, right? I mean, none of these things that people are dealing with since the Bible's written, isn't there? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think ELCA would say that it's even kind of, maybe not so much use the language of God's story, but that God's word is like even another kind of umbrella term to talk about both what we know in Scripture as well as kind of the history and trajectory of
Mm-hmm.
the Spirit moving through God.
Yeah. So
Is
to
that helpful? I don't know. Yeah.
yeah, Kim, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. So to that point, and I don't want to just like throw out the Bible with the bathwater here. I mean, of course not. That's where I got my doctorate. It's in the Bible, so I'll hold on to that. But the Bible is just full of all of these moments of God interacting in relationship with people, and then saying or showing this is how you interact with other people. And to double down on that, I am going to embody human form and show you that any sort of human interaction and relationship is where God is present, right? And so God is in every single interaction of human and created life, if that makes sense, right? So God coming down and experiencing sort of the fullness of human life, including suffering, rejection, sin, death, all of that in the form of Christ is going to be a way in which God models and shows God's love for all of creation, right? And so any sort of interaction between people in a related, in relationship is an example of God's story, right? So God's story is constantly unfolding, right? Constantly becoming new. Every new connection we make, so God's story has been extended, for in my body and your bodies by being here today, right? And being enriched by the relationship with one another. But even when you guys come back every Sunday, right, or whatever you do, throughout the week, is God's story unfolding together.
That accompaniment is a relationship. It's kind of, that's like a very foundational
Yeah.
piece related to what God is. So it's all has to be relational.
Yeah. So we're gonna talk.
Our mission is not. Mission is object.
Yes. Yeah.
Or can be object.
So we're going to do that a little bit here. So everybody, we got some Bibles. We're going to read a story. I think some of you might be familiar with it. If you're not, that's fine. But Luke 24:13 through 34. It's the Road to Emmaus story, if that means anything to anybody. And what I'd love is for somebody just to read it out loud, I think would be really good. Here? Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to, I want, and your name, I'm sorry, is it Rita? So, oh, there we go. Rita, yes. So Rita is going to Rita it out loud. And then instead of read in small groups, what I want you guys to do is I want everybody to kind of talk in small groups just for a few minutes and keep an eye out for these while we're going. Think about how you would describe the conversation the characters are having. Okay, so just what is it about this conversation that makes it unique? How do the characters respond to one another in the story? Because this is like very dialogue heavy. And then how do the characters in this story come to a new understanding? Okay, so how have things changed in their understanding of whatever they're trying to understand from the beginning to the end? Does that make sense? Okay, cool. Alrighty, Rita, take it away.
Luke 24:13 to 34. Yeah, okay. Now on that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days? He asked them, What things? They replied, The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him. Then he said to them, Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory? Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on, but they urged him strongly, saying, Stay with us, because it is almost evening, and the day is now nearly over. So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed, and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us? That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon. They made a 7-mile walk back after it was dark.
Ugh. Yeah, that's right. So, take some time, folks around you. I mean, maybe the two tables would be groups enough. And try and answer some of these questions together, and then we'll talk about it. I think we should probably do that in 5 minutes. It's the road to Damascus. Alrighty, let's come back together and talk about some of your observations. Felt louder. Felt loud. So what came up in your conversations?
What did I say? What was the question?
Just what came up. It was, pretty broad.
Oh.
Yeah, is he a stranger? Oh, yeah.
There was a discussion on if he was a stranger or the stranger bringing them together. And my question is he really a stranger? We have no description of what he looks like, and that's usually step one of other. And he was talking just like them about the things they were talking about. So I don't know that he was really a stranger.
Interesting.
Their assumption about it, they don't know him specifically in that regard, stranger, but it's not the stranger that we normally deal with when dealing with inviting, in the air quotes, the other. It's usually someone who doesn't look like us, talk like us, speaks the same language as us, or anything like that. That is not at all the impression I get from this passage. Does that also kind of, and we talked about how they clearly invite him in very quickly, in that, this person who supposedly they don't know, that kind of element of hospitality is a part of what makes this relational encounter kind of interesting or unique. Or would you do that? I don't know. Would you invite this person in?
The notion of being of other, of something that's not like you, so it would be harder. It would be harder to invite them in to have food. And we were talking about the fact that they recognize him at the point in time where he is essentially doing what they've seen him do before. Before he was crucified, which was to break bread, to take bread, bless it, and break it, and give it to them. So.
The rule of the desert. This is Joanne Brown's rule of the desert. Yeah. Also in Luke.
So they're with this dude who may or may not be the other. But I would throw out there, how many of you guys have neighbors? And how many of those neighbors, how many of you have neighbors who you would think twice or 3 times or 4 times about inviting into your home, right? So even if they're familiar, you see them every day in your dog walk. I think of somebody, there's one woman who I see on a walk every day. She's nice enough, and I think our dogs like each other more than we necessarily like each other. So our dog, we let him off leash at the park frequently, which, whatever. But it frequently happens we walk side by side on our walks a lot, and I would rather not be there for most of that walk, right? I just want to get my dog exercised and out rather than talk with her. Yeah. Yes.
So if you are in conversation with another person and it goes deep right away, and you share your grief and you share your disappointment, you've already made a connection. So in that context, it doesn't seem that surprising that they would then say, hey, don't go off by yourself. It's already dark. Come on in.
Yes.
Because they've already laid the groundwork.
So how did they lay the groundwork? how did they, let's go to this first question, right? How did they, what did the conversation look like? What happened, what were the first kind of phrases said?
Well, it was betrayal, a discussion of what the leaders had done.
Yeah,
And
so-
that was betrayed Jesus.
Yeah. Who was the first person to talk?
Jesus,
And does he use a statement or a question? I'm leading you guys.
what are you talking about?
Yeah. Yeah. What are you talking about? And then how did they respond?
They said what they were talking about.
Uh-huh. And Jesus says,
Are you the only, they say, are you the only person?
statement or a question?
Stranger?
It's a question.
Are you the only stranger
Yeah.
in Jerusalem who doesn't know what's been going on?
Yeah. And then Jesus says one of my favorite lines in the Bible, what things? You know, that's right. This is, yeah, the gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Or praise to you, O Christ, right? So he's just asking questions, right? There's this openness to one another. And they continue with that line of questioning, right, before they start getting deep. And in some ways, the question that the Cleopas and, did they name the other one? No, it's just Cleopas. Cleopas and friend. You know, their question is also, I mean, the response to the question is almost like a deflection, right? It's kind of a way to protect themselves, right? Have you not heard, right? So we're doing a little virtue signaling here and trying to say, like, are you on the level, you know? But yeah, so there's this kind of a posturing going back and forth, and it's uncomfortable, right? And so when do they come to the new understanding? I think I heard this group kind of talking about it a little bit more, but where did you guys see them kind of breaking bread?
I mean, that's where the
Yeah.
eyes open.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we talk about how it's a repeat of what they had seen.
Yeah. Yeah. Phil, you.
We know more about Cleopas and why and not really the other.
No, I mean,
Have this interaction?
no, but when you see somebody named and nobody else is named in the Bible, it usually means there was somebody in that community a long time ago who was kind of important, and the author is referencing something that early audiences would know, right? But unfortunately, either because written documents are destroyed or we just, you know, the stories have kind of run their course 2,000 years later, we just don't know. Yeah, yeah. But it's definitely a signal to somebody, for sure. Yeah. 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 One of the things I think about a lot is, like, you know, many people get passionate about things like, say, politics or whatever, and the arguments flow. You see political ads, and they just kind of like wash over you, right? Because you kind of pick out the things you agree with or not, or meaningful right away, and it just kind of like shut it down, right? There's somebody's talking at you. But when you sit down and have a meal with somebody, I think about this a lot. I think about how, like, the first date that people go on usually includes a meal, which is fascinating to me because eating is one of the most disgusting things we do as human beings, right? Like, we put things into our bodies, we turn them into, like, you know, gross stuff, and we're doing this as a way to, like, open up, you know, with somebody else, which means we become very vulnerable. It's a moment of vulnerability, right? Just doing composting together. That's right. Yes. How romantic. Yeah. And you know, so that there's a openness and vulnerability. And the other thing too is this is recalling another moment, right? It's recalling a story. It's eating food as story time, right? So Jesus doing the breaking of the bread is him physically telling a story about that means something to who they all kind of are commonly together. And so the physical act of eating is kind of story time. So in this way, accompaniment becomes that kind of moment of opening up, becoming vulnerable with somebody, and telling and hearing other people's stories. I don't want to dwell too much on it, but I think this is something that telling stories can be a real struggle for those of us who grew up in sort of Scandinavian, Northern European influenced societies where we have to be humble and not, be braggadocious. But there's vulnerability in opening up and telling our own stories too, because at that moment, then somebody else has the openness to say, I understand who you are. Now I feel comfortable or not with you. And so it's not just about asking questions and hearing people's stories, it's also about telling your own story. This accompaniment theology has a number of pieces to it, right? And the first being, it demands that we know one another as children of God. So to the question of what is God's story, it's this big enveloping thing about all of these children of God together. Okay. When we become vulnerable, when we tell our story to other people and open up to hearing theirs and being changed by it, that's when we start to understand the root causes of poverty, okay? If you just donate and give your money to organizations like ELCA World Hunger, or Lutheran World Federation or Red Cross or, whatever. I don't know why I just blanked on all of the charitable organizations in the world. Right, that's a way of keeping somebody at arm's length because you're not asking, you're not taking the time to learn about why they're in poverty. Because somebody who has need knows exactly why, right? They know that it's because housing is too expensive, or they know it's because they can't afford not just food, but sort of daily hygienic needs like tampons or pain medication or, list goes on and on, toilet paper. So when it comes to ELCA World Hunger, we start to think about, and frankly, I'll say ELCA and all of ELCA's outward-facing ministries, so global missions, disaster response, Amparo, all of us are thinking about this in the same way. It changes how we operate. So on a basic level, right, we change our language. We think about, rather than sort of serve, help, aid, we think about words like partner, collaborator, support, right, things of that nature that are more sort of mutual. We think about how we become story listeners and storytellers. If you guys have ever seen any sort of like ELCA publication that, I don't know, usually it just winds up in like, the church office on like a side table. But next time you're in the church office and you see the side table or the pamphlets, read it and count the number of times you see story. It's almost like it's like a meme to some degree, but it's really important. We don't talk much about data, even though we work with data. We talk a lot about stories because a data point is a story. And a story is something that we can be impacted by. We can also tell our story. And then we support root cause ending ministries. So those are our partners, are people who demonstrate, so like when we give grants, there's an application and they have to demonstrate that they're addressing root causes of poverty as described by the community of which they are a part. Does that make sense? So when you're in a space, we think about ending root causes and letting those communities describe for us what those root causes are. So there's basically five pieces to this particular theology. So first, there's mutuality. Okay, so this is one of our 5 values. So it's there we go. So it's this understanding that we recognize that everybody's got gifts. Everybody has strengths. We do, and you do, they do, all of us do have gifts, and we share one of those and we can build one another up within them. Okay, inclusivity, right? So we recognize that everybody has something to share and that there are people in our society who have been historically excluded from being part of God's story, from being part of our story, or being understood to be part of our story. And so we have to take stock of why, and which I think is something that a lot of Lutherans are very good at. We love thinking about why things are the way they are. And that's important. And then it's a matter of inviting, which is oftentimes the difficult step of inviting somebody into our community and including them. All right, so vulnerability. So this is also perhaps, it's wrapped up in very much in inclusivity, and the next one, empowerment, that we're going to talk about. But there's a struggle with showing our willingness to give up power for the sake of relationship. So if I think I have the resources and I want to be in relationship with you, I want to support my community, not only do I have to get to know you, I have to be willing to give up power and security, sense of control. Where are my control freaks? You know, yeah, like giving up control in a situation is really difficult. Letting them into my space. Why are you being goofy? Okay. So empowerment. This is necessary to think about alongside vulnerability. So giving somebody else the power. If you just say I want to empower you, that's not good enough. It's I give up my power for you, for the sake of our relationship. So to then hand you the tools to say your life, it matters enough for me to trust that you know how your life can be grown and improved, right? Does that make sense? So to put the trust in somebody else's hands. So like, you know, at the end of the day, giving resources is probably the most important thing you can do to a community. So, money is like really, really important. And so giving people those financial tools is difficult. You know, we have lots of, checks and balances, and I think us too. I work with some of our granting people, and yeah, we've got applications, and we want to make sure that people are using the money we want the way we want them to. But when we let mistrust take over, our how we think about giving our resources and empowering people, then we run into a problem, and it's not helpful. It's harmful because people don't like to feel mistrusted. And then finally, sustainability. So accompaniment with any community means that, in any ministry at all, means that we want to make sure that survives. So we want to invite as many people in to help us with it so we don't burn out. And we want to constantly be engaged on the ground with our folks to say what's not working, what is working, what do you need to keep this moving forward at long-term at a sustainable level. Okay, so those are 5 values. Any questions, thoughts, feelings? Whoa, look at this. So I'm actually, I was going to do one thing next, but I want to flip things around. We're going to come back to that. I want to talk about Tapestry because it's a specific example. So I had the opportunity to be at an event with Tapestry. They are a Lutheran congregation, an ELCA congregation in Richfield. They're celebrating their 10th anniversary, and being there, I was like, this is the story that more people need to hear. So, like I said, they're in Richfield. Their ministry, again, thinking about accompaniment, starts in their community. It's 20% Latina, okay? There are many immigrants. Most of them are from Venezuela and Guatemala, I think. They know from their connection with the community that the people there prioritize their children and prioritize education. And they also know that housing is expensive. So people want to live nearby their communities. They want to live nearby